Hello everyone, Burb here. We're about to find out how many Curren-chan Oshi players there really are because this video is 3 days late, which I apologize for, but Side Games keeps releasing double banners right in the middle of Champions Meeting season, which is my most busy season for making videos. So without further ado, this is a way too in-depth guide to wedding Curren-chan. I'll talk about the banner real quick and then we'll get right into the character. For the banner, if you're a Curren-chan Oshi player, you probably already pulled on this banner, but if you haven't and you got cold feet, you should pull for the characters that you enjoy. And this character in particular, Curren-chan Wedding, this skin of hers is meant for the 1,000 meter tracks. Now it can be used on sprints and miles, and of course in Track Blazer without any medium aptitude, it is very difficult for her to actually function because you're really only able to do miles and sprints without some major aptitude adjustments. But this is something that you Curren-chan enjoyers already know. So what does this character, this skin of Curren-chan, give over her base? Well, she has better sprint skills and she has very good stat bonuses, and of course her ultimate is specifically built for 1,000 meter tracks. So that is her advantage over the other Curren. I think she's quite good in the very specific situations where she's useful for. I would not recommend this generally to people, but as an Oshi player, there's certainly places where she is the most dominant horse on the track. Her aptitudes are kind of bad, unfortunately, because you have short A or sprint A and mile D with medium G, long G, which means, again, Track Blazer, very difficult, but you need some aptitude adjustment even to get into mile. You can do and force dirt by going from dirt F to dirt B and praying for dirt A. However, you can't really do dirt A and mile A at the same time without getting multiple pink sparks, which makes it very difficult for her to even function outside of Track Blazer, outside of sprints. So you're mainly going to be looking at sprints, either sprints in the turf or sprints in the dirt, and occasionally you may go and force her into mile, but her ultimate really wants to be in the sprint section. She's a pace chaser by design. I think there's maybe some merit to go and pulling her into the front runner position, and you can go and force her into the late surger position, but I don't think it's very useful, and I think most of her value is because she is a pace chaser, because her ultimate is second through fourth position. So her stat bonuses are beautiful. I said this was probably the best thing in her kit besides maybe her ultimate on certain tracks, but speed, power, wit, 10% each is probably the best stat spread we've seen in this game. You can run pretty much any deck that you want. You're running sprints and miles, which means you probably are guts maxing this character, so the guts button is going to give you speed and power, and that's going to be amplified, and the wit button is going to give you wit and speed, and that's going to be double amplified as well. So you basically have 20% on the two buttons that you want in the guts maxing build, and in the speed, power, wit build, your speed and wit build, and you may not even need some power buttons, but you're probably running like solo power with two speed, 3 wit, and basically it's the same thing. The speed button is going to give you 20% amplification, and the wit button is going to give you 20% amplification. So it's very nice for sprint to have 10 in the 3 stats that you actually want in sprint tracks. And don't look at exactly the cards in this deck, but look at the composition of them. Her ultimate, one true color, says if positioned towards the front with 350 meters or less remaining and there is another Umamusume close behind, the determination to stay ahead makes it easier to break out of the pack. This is actually a pretty simple ultimate. There's only a couple of conditions and they're quite easy to fulfill. So 350 meters basically means that at the 350 mark or later, if you satisfy the other 2 conditions, it will proc immediately. Now, the other 2 conditions are quite simple. You have to be between 2nd and 4th place, or 20% and 40% order rate, which means League of Heroes, you get to go to the 5th place if you like. But that just means, hey, you're allowed to pass into this a little bit late, and it'll proc a little bit late, but you're really intending to go and grab enough mid-race to grab this 2nd place position or the 4th place position, etc. So if you're between 2nd through 4th place at the 350 meter marks and there's any horse that's within a length of you, which should happen because on these shorter tracks the pack gets really bunched up around that final corner, you will proc her ultimate immediately at the 350 meter mark. Now what does that mean? You get a hybrid ultimate. That hybrid ultimate is 0.3 excel, 0.25 target speed for 5 seconds. Now, this hybrid being a hybrid ultimate means that it's not really the strongest of speed outputs. You're about 40% worse than something like Lights of Vaudeville. which means that you have something else to rely on, which is the 0.3 acceleration. That 0.3 acceleration is incredible when it works, and on tracks like this sprint track here, it will be in the acceleration zone, so you will get value from that 0.3 that is higher than just a standard speed ultimate. Just like pretty much every single hybrid ultimate in the game, however, the ultimate inherit is usually shredded a bit. So the speed category gets minus 0.2, so it's only about 0.15 distance units compared to 0.75, so it's about 80% worse than a good inherit, but you do get that 0.1 excel. And if we've learned anything from El Condor Pasa, the 0.1 excel hybrid ultimate characters can be used as parents when they proc at a good time, which for her is on any 1,000 meter or possibly 1,200 meter track itself. As I was saying, the 1,200 meter tracks, you're looking at pretty much only the acceleration components. It's technically a slight late proc depending on the track that you're running. It's very, very similar to El Condor Pasa because on most tracks, I would say, because that final straight is usually pretty close to the actual final spurt. So that spurt and the straight are pretty close, about 50 meters away. It's about a little bit earlier than it, so it's a little bit better proc, but you will only get the acceleration component. That's what I'm going for, is that, hey, there's a speed component that's lost when you're going and procking a little bit late on the 1,200 meter tracks. However, on the 1,000 meter tracks, the 350 mark, unlike these final straights, is actually before the spurt itself. So 350 meters allows you to get that speed component, go up to that extra speed, proceed to speed carry over into the acceleration for the rest of it. If that sounds familiar, that is because this is basically Christmas Oguri ult on the 1,000 meter tracks in particular. Now, there's only 8 1,000 meter tracks that will be in the game at the point of Japanese release. There's 3 of them that have not entered the game yet, so that leaves 5 of them, of which 3 of those are dirt, which means that her aptitude will have to be forced into. However, these last 2 tracks, she is an absolute monster on. The Hakodate 1000 meter is a 350 meter track that you will get that speed carry over on. The one track that she is notoriously powerful on is that Nagata 1000 meter straight line track. Because it's a straight line, there's no angling and scheming. There's basically no corner skills. There's no final corner or later skills, which means like 90% of the things in the game will not work for accelerations. And you not only have an acceleration ultimate, you have an ultimate that speed carries over into acceleration. So imagine saying that you have Christmas Oguri on the current CM that you're on, except no one else has any accelerations. There's no redshift. There's nothing here on that derby track. Yes, very, very, very powerful on that specific track. Her careers and events. She has a sprint career. It's a lot like Bakushin's career. Her secret events are she just gets a bonus mood up, and the sprint series conquered means you just add the Keeneland Cup and the Centaur States. Well, whether it's worth it, you get basically a free tap or free training tap plus a mood for running those 3. On scenarios where we're not really racing too much, you probably don't do it, but otherwise it's okay to do. It doesn't really give anything extra because sprinting gear is part of one of her innate skills as well. So Curren Chan's real events that is her advantage is that most of her skills are actually in her real events that just sort of pop up. Now, they aren't the greatest skills. Disorient doesn't really do too much right now, and that is a top or bottom option, so you're probably just taking the speed at that point. Sprint corners is good on sprints, of course, and Frenzy's late surgers doesn't really do anything because if you're rushed as a late surger on a sprint track, you're probably not stamming out anytime soon. So it doesn't really do much. So sprint corners is really the only one that does much in her kit in terms of events and skills. However, she is a fast learner character. And this fast learner event technically doesn't say fast learner random, so it could be any percentage, but I bet you that it is very close to that 6% that you're seeing in the other characters. But nevertheless, that is an additional fast learner chance if you know from gold chip and stuff. Just having that extra event for fast learner just basically means you get fast learner twice as amount of times, which is very, very nice on the sprint tracks that are basically skill showdowns basically. Her regular innate skills are PCS, Pace Chaser Savvy, and Hesitant Frontrunners and Pace Chaser Corners. Really, Pace Chaser Corners is the only one of the 3 that really does something too much. Pace Chaser Savvy is basically wit, but only for track, not skill proc rate. And Hesitant Frontrunners, yes, like I said, it's a velocity against Frontrunners, which is nice, but it's not necessarily the most efficient skill in the world. So PCS is her innate skill, but then you have your gold skills. Adored by all is the gold version of Intimidate, which is very powerful because you basically have a minus 0.25 3-second speed debuff on everybody that is behind you. This is practically a gold skill. It's slightly less than a gold skill, but it is unique, and that means that you can just run all the other gold skills and just grab Adored by All, and that acts as an additional advantage over other characters. Turbo Sprint as well is basically straightaway acceleration, or I believe it's called Rushing Gale, but for sprints only. So it is a 50-50 if it chooses the correct straight, and then it is a straightaway acceleration. Could be late proc, could be early proc, stuff like that. I think it is quite useful on sprints because we have a plethora of skill points to use because we don't really have to care about stamina as well. So very powerful sprint skills, but like I said, it's for sprint tracks in particular, which makes her CM viability a little bit tough. The current CM14 Gemini Cup, she gets a tiny bit of excel because the 350 mark is about 200 meters late, but it's 300 meters is basically what would happen if you hit your 0.4. If you hit your 0.4, 300 meters is safe, so you get a tiny bit of acceleration, but you get nearly all the speed on the current mile CM. So you can run her there because of aptitude, but it's a little bit tough. CM16 is a sprint track, which means you get to use your gold skills, and also her ultimate is a slight late proc, but it's still pretty good considering that this is basically one of the shortest spurts that we have. So any number of acceleration is going to be very, very powerful. 21 is the next sprint CM, Capricorn, which is another 1200 meter map. It is a slight late proc as well, but this has a longer spurt, so acceleration is very, very, very nice, but we actually have to care about our late race speed, where this one we will not have to care about our late race speed as much because we will be very, very, it'll be very, very hard to accelerate to max speed before it. Apparently there's an event on this track. I didn't see a CM on it, but I'm sure there is. Like I said before, if this track is ever used in anything, this character is absolutely ridiculous because nothing else besides her ultimate basically works. There's very few things that actually work in this Nagata 1000 meter straight line. So this is where she truly shines. This plus the other 1000 meter turf track are we're going to be seeing. I haven't seen any Champions Meeting use those two tracks in particular, but someone in the comments can figure out what they used this track was, because I've heard that it was like notorious. They did it once and they never came back to it for this reason. But the Nagata 1000 meter straight line is her best track, and you can run her on sprints, and she basically is like an additional VPP ultimate from 2nd through 4th, which is very, very consistent. Her affinities are, as such, Taiki Shuttle, Shakurakshino, and Nishino Flower, and then that's about it. She's a sprinter, so there's very few characters that have run as many sprints as she has, and her affinity with most characters are 20 or less. The next highest, I believe, is Agnes Digital at 20, and that's a character notoriously good for affinity for a lot of characters. So the fact that her affinities are very low is a little bit unfortunate. However, I think most of the characters that you're going to be running on these sprint tracks are also the characters that have high affinity with Curren wedding. So her parentage is not the greatest outside of these three characters, but luckily at least they are the three characters you're probably running on sprint. So in conclusion, this video was rather simple, to be honest. It's pretty quick. This character is not very difficult to understand. She was meant to be 1,000 meter tracks, and they don't use 1,000 meter tracks very often. But even if they use her on 1,200 meter sprint tracks, which also is on the occasional Champions Meeting, she's very good on them. She has a 0.3 excel, so you just put another 0.2 excel, and you are basically ahead of anybody else using acceleration at that point. I think she's very useful in the situations where she's in. But I can't recommend this to the general population. I don't think there's too much meta implications outside of possibly that one event where they use that Nagata 1000 meter, and I think there's enough alternatives to do so. But again, if you're an Oshi player for Curren, this is certainly a very comfortable version of the character because you have speed, power, wit, and she is usable on those sprint tracks as well. So, no pun this time. I know you all are currently awaiting for me to end this video. Take care, everyone. Burb out.